Hello, everyone. Happy Sunday, and welcome to the Restoring Our Roots podcast, the voice of the Decriminialize Nature movement. This podcast is a gathering space where we explore the wisdom of entheogenic plants and fungi, the beauty of natural healing, and the importance of reconnecting with the sacred earth. Twice a month, we'll hear from visionaries, healers, and advocates who are working with entheogenic plants and fungi, exploring the realms of consciousness and returning us to a balanced relationship with nature. My name is Larry Norris. I'm the co-founder of Decriminialize Nature. I'm also the national organizing director. I've been lucky enough to work with teams all across the U.S. to help pass policy. It's been pretty exciting to see the movement grow over the many years. It's almost 6 years now, almost 6 year anniversary in June. So that's pretty exciting. We'll have a little bit of a rah-rah for that. And if you are in a city and you're looking to join the movement in any kind of way, please contact us at decriminializenature.org. We have some really easy ways to kind of hop on board, and everyone should be learning how to pass policy at the city council level. So come join us and be part of this incredible movement. I also like to introduce our behind the scenes producer, Rachel, who's been such an incredible joy having on board here. Really does all the backwork scenes, making sure that we have it on live here and we have it on our Spotify and other platforms as well afterwards. So thank you, Rachel, for all your help. Rachel usually posts these on Spotify the week after we are live. So we're live today, and then next Sunday we'll have this posted. We're on quite a few new platforms now as well: Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, YouTube. I think we're YouTube Live today as well. If you'd like to make a donation to help support this amazing movement and show, you can do that on the podcast buttons. Just click the donation button. And for any live listeners out there, Rachel will be also gathering any questions or comments you have during the conversation. So please go ahead and put those in the chat box and we'll answer them towards the end of the podcast. I'm really excited today to have our next guest. Rachel told me this is episode 13, season 2, episode 3. We had 10 episodes in the first season, and we're excited to continue on with an incredible lineup over the rest of this month. But today we have Jack, and Jack Gorsline has been doing an incredible job out there with some investigative reporting. I really like to differentiate between investigative journalist and reporter. Reporter just kind of repeats what people tell you about. Investigative journalism is really like checking the authenticity, doing all the sourcing, going to do the legwork and all that kind of thing. So I really appreciate Jack for all the work you've been doing. And just a short amount of time, you've broken some really interesting stories. You're also founder of Psychedelic States of America, which just, I think, emerged in the last maybe 6 months or so. And we can talk about that in a little bit as well. So it's really awesome to see all the work you're doing out there and how you're gathering people and coming together in community and really taking a grassroots approach to investigative journaling, which I appreciate. So how are you doing today, Jack? Nice to have you here.
I am good, Larry. Thank you for having me. It's a long time coming, and super grateful for your work in this space, and honestly for Decrimature's work in this space, because it gives somebody like me, somebody who's trying to cover really what's going on from the ground up, something to write about in the first place. Um, just honestly, really honored and excited to chop it up today.
Very awesome. Awesome. Yeah, maybe we could start off with a little background bio. Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got interested in this area, and sort of maybe how you got started on this.
Yeah, so it is definitely, I mean, the psychedelic space in general has no shortage of interesting off the beaten path origin stories. I think one of the reasons I gravitated towards it for sure. We're definitely a rowdy lot of misfits, if you will. Um, I got my start as a reporter a little over 18 months ago. I am that particular strain of ADHD, if you will, that kind of knew what I wanted to be when I was 12 years old, and it was to be a journalist. And I told my grandmother, proud Southern woman, born and raised in Hickory, North Carolina, that I wanted to go to Brown University and I wanted to be a journalist. And she told me that if I moved to New England, that they would turn me into a hippie liberal. And here I am. I'm based in the Boston area. I've been here for about 5 years, as of June 17th, actually, the 5 year anniversary of my moving to Boston. We're going to be out at Psych Science, and I'm going to be hosting a panel on the first day right before lunch hour with representatives of the Northeast Psychedelic Advocacy Alliance. So it's been a very wild ride just in those 5 years of being in Boston, and in the 18 months, a little over that now that I kind of got my start. So did a roundabout journey. I was a college football player for a little while, dropped out of college, did kind of the very off the beaten path journey. Ended up summer of 2019 in New Orleans with 62 cents in my bank account, a duffel bag under each arm, and no idea where I was going to sleep that night. No idea if I'd have a roof. long backstory. It's probably best shared at a later time, that led me to that point. But really, in that moment, kind of woke up and realized that I hadn't really done anything with my life, at least to my estimation, that served a purpose beyond my own ambition. I just got back from a conference in Austin earlier this week. There was all these different, psychedelic guides, and facilitators, and a big theme was feeling called to serve, these communities. And it may sound a little bit corny, but I didn't anticipate that I would get, stuck, so to speak, covering the psychedelic beat in the first place, that I would stumble into it. I got my start wanting to cover education issues as, a 28-year-old college student finishing my associate's degree at Bunker Hill Community College, most famously known as the school that Robin Williams taught at in Good Will Hunting, if you've seen that movie. I was finishing my degree there, trying to save a little bit of money as I finished the last of my bachelor's, and wanted to start a student newspaper because they didn't have one. And I figured if I want to get some experience, I might as well learn how the whole, you know, operation works top to bottom as quickly as possible. Long story short, again, long story save, better save for another time at length, they wouldn't let me. And in that raising hell about the fact that I wasn't allowed to start a student newspaper, I came in contact with the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism, the co-founders of which Jason Promise and Chris Ferrone have become my kind of mentors, Obi-Wans, if you will. Chris Ferrone is also the founder of TalkingJointsMemo.com, which is where I got my start covering psychedelic issues. So shortly after I got my start with them, my very first staff meeting, somebody, was late because they were, up late covering a local psychedelic advocacy event in the greater Boston area the night before. And I just so happened to have started working with the girlfriend of one James Davis, who Larry, you and I both know, and kind of became the reason that I've kind of emerged in this space, the founder of an organization called Base Daters for Natural Medicine, recently rebranded as Base Daters for Creative Wellbeing. But stumbled into a series of misconduct stories involving this individual, including taking money from, a prominent PAC, New Approach PAC, prior to endorsing a ballot initiative in Massachusetts last 2 years ago at this point. 2023 is when he took the money, but didn't really tell anybody about it. Teamed up with the Prohibitionist Lobby and Smart Approaches to Marijuana and Kevin Sabet to try to kill the initiative that he'd, endorsed in full just a few months prior. And then the big kind of story that I stumbled into was that I uncovered that he'd been impersonating a former collaborator of his, U.S. Marine veteran Mike Botello, for over 9 months, submitting written testimony in his name, et cetera. And it really kind of vindicated a lot of advocates in the greater Massachusetts, and New England area, especially those, quick shout out to the old team at Decrim Nature, Massachusetts, Ranch Guerra, Brendan O'Connell, Kate Average, also a good friend, really had a phenomenal team that was really the driving force, though you wouldn't know it from local media coverage, a gripe that I'd love to get into at some point. Decrim Nature, Massachusetts was really the driving force behind Somerville and Cambridge passing deprioritization measures at the municipal level back in 2020 and 2021, respectively. But this individual and this organization that he was running solely by himself, essentially, with the exploitation of a number of collaborators along the way, is still claiming responsibility. So having broken that story and really become endeared to and kind of championed by a lot of grassroots advocates in New England who'd had similar experiences, realized that their stories needed to be told. And in covering the Question 4 campaign, came to, realize that their voices weren't really valued by the powers that be, as you know as well as I do, Larry. I'm, sure we'll talk about that as well. But from that, really decided that I wanted to document as many grassroots voices in these spaces as possible. If there was a policy development and I was going to write about it in Minnesota or Michigan or Missouri or wherever, I was going to be the article and the reporter that was always quoting the grassroots sources on the ground, the people in these communities that were taking time out of their days, unpaid wage, not making any money to do this, going to City Hall or, up to the steps of power, if you will, and actually driving change. And so much of the coverage that I saw here in Massachusetts, as well as across the country, just fails to do that. And they're missing out on documenting, I think, what I would define as one of the last swaths of what could be described as American heroes, especially in the psychedelic space, given, how incredibly unique this movement is politically. And I'm sure we'll get into that, but that is an elongated version of my origin story. And I just want to note, like, Larry, you were a huge champion of mine when, I first started documenting some of the misconduct by Bay Staters and by James Davis, and really vindicated me in navigating some, rightfully so, some doubts of the veracity of what I'd uncovered because of tactics by powers that be to discredit meaningful grassroots voices in states prior, in Oregon, Colorado, California, and many other places. It's not uncommon, but when you stepped up and you validated and championed what I was reporting, it really meant a lot. So thank you. And yeah, that's my elongated origin story.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. Appreciate it. Yeah, no, I mean, there's so much there that I want to sort of unpack a little bit, but let's before we get into the juicy nitty-gritty stuff, let's talk even just about some of the history there. It sounds like you were saying that when you're at your school, they wouldn't let you put the paper together, and I often think about this has happened with some other organizations I've done as well. It seems like as soon as the authority says no to you about something, it always backfires on them. It's like some new thing happens from that. And then you're like, wow, okay, I'm free of this. And now I've created this thing that's totally new and totally, can work on my own and be independent. And maybe
Yeah.
speak a bit about that process in terms of like I know there's oftentimes this sort of frustration and this sort of like, this angst around sort of not being accepted by, being able to do the thing that you want to do, but then how that sort of motivates and sort of helps you create something brand new.
Yeah. It's definitely been really interesting. And it's actually a really um, interesting that you mentioned that, because of recent projects that I've been working on that have really been in response, brought some projects together really in response to the fact that nobody else was going to do it. And nobody else was going to be able to pay to do the work that, I felt needed to be documented. So I wanted to build an apparatus that would help fund that. Um, and I think, yeah, getting shot down, being able to start a student paper was a huge blow and really a wake up call that I was going to have to get creative and going to have to think outside of the box, either to put pressure on them to let me do it or to find a way to do it outside of their confines. And one thing led to another. And, like I said, at the end of my first staff meeting, I was assigned to the psychedelics beat. But even from there, um, seeing how inadequate mainstream coverage of some of the developments in Massachusetts had been. Reporters that weren't aware of, key grassroots advocates in the space other than this one individual. Reporters, Pulitzer Prize finalists from the Boston Globe, who knew without question that this, activist James Davis was guilty of, innumerate forms of misconduct, interpersonally and otherwise, and yet still quoted him at length and, and championed him in the media for the sake of a good story. So, and seeing the adequacy really spurred me to put a megaphone in front of some of the advocates and make them unavoidable for mainstream sources. I just definitely was a huge motivator when I realized that, for example, and you interviewed her in season 1, I believe, but Jamie Morey, who was in the Question 4 campaign and a former kind of Bay Staters refugee, if you will, founder of Parents for Plant Medicine, now the co-founder of Mass Healing, like she's a single class working mom of 4 who is the most prolific psychedelic activist in the state level in terms of the most amount of, highest number of bills filed in one legislative session ever alive. She's a working class mom of 4 with no funding. And in so many ways, her not being known to the Boston Globe, they haven't written a word about her. They haven't written a word about the 12 bills filed. Is really a travesty that I think this community can respond to in a collaborative and communicative way that, again, makes these voices unavoidable.
Mhm. Yeah, I want to just sort of touch on something you're saying there about how a lot of this, and this sounds like the work you're doing, obviously the work we're doing at Decrim Nature and other places as well, Jamie and other folks, there's this element of like, well, no one else is doing it. We gotta step in because otherwise you're gonna have some deep pockets going there and they're gonna create something you don't want. And that was my big kind of awakening in this process of Decrim Nature policy is like, wait a second, these people work for us in terms of legislators, right? They're our employees. We forget that
Huh?
sometimes. And B, like, if we don't get in there, that's our job. If we don't protect consciousness, who's going to protect consciousness? And so that's what we're seeing all across the US, I think. And I liked how you framed it earlier. I'm going to pat everyone on the back out there who's part of a Decrim Nature team, and anyone who's thinking about it. These are truly the new American heroes in many ways. We're not just talking about changing policy. We're talking about getting community together. We're talking about protecting consciousness. We're talking about, people's unalienable rights to be able to have these experiences with plants and mushrooms. And so in many ways, people coming together, the courageousness. I always think about this, when we had our Oakland and all these testimonies actually, but the first one that stands out for me is Oakland. We had like 100 people, give testimony, right? And we only invited like 20, right? And 100 of them came. Only think one person, everyone was positive. One person was talking about a different issue. So basically almost 99% positive, right? And almost a good proportion of them said, on public record, I broke the law. This is why I need to change it. I'm here today because of it. Like, talk about courageousness, talking about, standing up for what's right, so I think that's something that's really been powerful to watch, to see these communities come together. Oftentimes the only thread that links them are these entheogenic plants and fungi, and then they come together, make things happen. I'm having a little trouble hearing you, Jack. I don't know if your audio is off, but try to say
Oh
something.
no, I was just saying, like nodding along and saying,
Okay,
yeah,
gotcha. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, no,
Sorry. Yeah. No worries. Yeah. Yeah.
agreeing with
Uh,
you. That's all.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So I think that's really just something, and I think what you're doing now with your sort of your traveling psychedelic stories and everything, and we'll talk about that in a minute, is a great way to sort of bring those voices out because again, most news, we sometimes get local news. We'll talk about it. The CBS, ABC, NBC affiliates or whatever because they like the little news story, but they say was it the Gil Scott Heron, the revolution will not be televised, right? You're not seeing this, except for when we started off, you're not really seeing this in CNN. In fact, CNN the other day had the article that said unsupervised use of psychedelics has increased over the last 6 years, and everyone's like, "Yay!" And
Calls
CNN,
it
of course, is like, "Oh, right, go ahead."
calls it unproven. Calls psychedelic like calls psilocybin assisted therapy unproven. Like when we know based on this, clear cut science that it's the least likely drug to develop a dependency on. I mean, just by the actual science behind psilocybin and the substance itself, it's one of the safest, psychedelic compounds known to man, psychoactive substances known to man. So the claim that it's this dangerous thing, it continues to baffle me. LA Times wrote an article a few weeks ago that called cacao ayahuasca light.
Wow.
Oh, what are we doing here? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just basic fact check stuff. And I think it's important to note, like, not all these reporters that are writing these articles are acting with inherent malice, right?
Mm,
Like, a lot of these outlets are assigning a health tech or science reporter who does not know this issue, does not know the political science, the political nuances of this issue, doesn't know the science very well, and just calls the first, drug science specialist in whatever the call sheet is that they have in their database of people that you call for a story like this. They're not actually going and finding the perfect person in a lab at, for example, the University of Alabama, Birmingham has a phenomenal entheogenic and psychoactive, research, psychedelic substance research lab that is very equipped to talk about things like borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder and psychedelic use. But they're not calling them, they're
mm,
calling, we're going to give them the scare quote because
right.
that's the database for these reporters to call. And I think it's the LexisNexis is what some reporters that their organizations can afford it. I don't have anything like that. But
Yeah.
it is uh, ultimately not necessarily always on these reporters. Like they're thrown into this issue, parachuted in, as Dennis Walker likes to say. Um, and it's bad. It's not journalism. It's, you know, funneling a narrative that sells really well in an age that attention is the social currency of our time, as I like to say. It's really easy to take cheap shots. But what I found is that people are actually looking for better information about psychedelics. Use is going up. General evergreen content is pretty repetitive in terms of like what are so the next step is that people are looking for more nuanced coverage of both the science and political developments in this space.
Right.
And they're looking for it, especially because, for example, in 2018, there was an Associated Press poll that indicated that 70% of Americans don't trust the mainstream media. Um, they're looking for it in alternative media spaces.
Mm,
TalkingDointsMemo.com, where I got my start, was a newsletter for 10 years before email newsletters were cool for journalism.
mm,
And made the jump while so many other outlets have failed to a full website a little over 2 years ago. in the time that I've been writing for them in 18 months, like roughly 1 in 3 clicks has been on a psychedelics article. And talkingjointsmemo.com, which is a regional cannabis news outlet in New England, has become the fourth most trafficked cannabis news outlet on the internet in the United States in
Mm.
that time. People are clamoring for more nuanced information, for better coverage, because they're interested and they're aware that these things are not to be taken lightly. Some people, maybe not. Some people, there's people that are always going to use certain substances recklessly. That's why we need robust harm education and integration resources for them, not prohibitionists. I'm now getting on my political soapbox and I will cede back to you. But yeah, no, I think above all else, while there is some pretty subpar media coverage and not journalism, as I would call it, surrounding psychedelics in mainstream sources, there's also some really phenomenal independent journalism that is actually driving real educational reform in the zeitgeist for people who are looking for better content and information and
Yeah.
resources. So
Seems like the hard part is sifting through all that because, while you say, that maybe it's not the journalists are just getting kind of parachuted into an issue in terms of some of these mainstream articles, there's still the languaging that's used.
agreed.
The
Agreed.
biasing and the languaging it's so hidden. And as a journalist, there's the magic of wording, the magic of narratives, the magic of you use this word versus this word. You're implying certain things. What is that like? I mean, obviously, the behind the scenes of how to use wording. When you read an article like the CNN unsupervised use and blah blah blah, like, is that just standing out for you? Like, how do you navigate the wording for like the regular person out there that's trying to understand how to sift through all this information? How does it? What are some takeaways in terms of how to read an article?
I so appreciate that, and honestly, like like I said, I've wanted to be a reporter since I was a little kid. But my high school didn't have a student, I didn't have a student newspaper in high school. I didn't really have any journalistic experience because I was playing. Um, sorry, uh, getting a phone call.
No worries.
I was playing football for so many years, so I didn't have time to do any of that. So I have really been able to learn from some phenomenal reporters over the last 18 months. And one of the things I'm very proud of, and some of the feedback that I get that's been, really great to hear, is that readers, and folks who check out my work really find it accessible and digestible. And I think that's really taking this, trying to take these complex policy issues and put it in the most simple terms, possible. Yeah, and I think above all else, putting a face on the issue makes it so much more accessible. If you're just quoting, and I'm giving examples from the Question 4 campaign because it was really my first big exposure to the political process. But for months, they just quoted the spokesperson from the political consulting firm that was helping run the campaign when they had like Jamie Morey as their educational outreach director and like bona fide grassroots advocate with a great story. Mother who moved heaven and earth through all legal resources that she could find to provide the best care for her children. Nothing worked, so she turned to psilocybin. It's the only thing that did. Would you criminalize that mother? And they didn't even want to talk about it. I know reporters that like didn't know that she worked for the campaign until weeks after the election.
Mm.
It just didn't say, so when you put a faceless corporate name on an issue, that I've met with activists from every single possible nook and cranny of the political spectrum that you can imagine across, 37 states and counting. Hopes to interview one from all 50 plus DC and Puerto Rico before the end of the calendar year. And when we get in a room, regardless of whether they're, a fan of the spray tan man, as I call him, or farther on the left on it, like I am personally, I so many other issues where there's bipartisan consensus, they can get in that room and they can't only talk about the thing they agree on. Psychedelics, everybody's coming to this place from a place of desperation for healing, or having, found that healing and being outraged that no matter where you're from or what your background is, that other people can't access it as well. So it's really the one issue I've seen, uh, at least in my experience covering it, that yeah, the political diversity is unprecedented, and that's a word that's way overused. But uh, it also is unprecedented in that they don't get in there and squabble about any other issue. We're here to talk about psychedelics.
Mm.
It's really the focus, and it's really refreshing and invigorating to be able to cover while so much of the world around us seems to be burning and crumbling, etc. But I also think that there's a blueprint there. You and I talked about this when we first connected, Larry. Like, I really view and believe, and have been saying this more frequently, recently, that, regardless of the outcome, fully corporatized and pharmaceuticalized or decrim for all, the political arm of the psychedelic renaissance will be remembered as one of the most consequential political movements of the 21st century, because of the blueprint that it could establish for true populist reform across any number of political issues. We have a pipeline. We have a way that you can bring about these issues that have consensus, drive it from the local to state to regional to federal level. And Decrim Nature has been a huge part of establishing what that pipeline could look like. So again, it's been really an honor to be able to cover a lot of these developments, but also fascinating. And I think something that I personally both nerd out about, but want everybody and their mother and their mother's cousin to know about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so I know you're itching to talk a little bit more about Massachusetts in question four. We've kind of dabbled on a little bit. Sounds like there's two different areas that are relevant to talk about.
Mm.
First is sort of the base staters angle, and then the new approach angle. Start off with the base staters, and then because new approach kind of really kind of went through the tail end of it, and the base staters thing went to the beginning time James Davis. And I know there's James. When I say base staters, there's a lot of folks or a handful of folks that were part of that have sort of stepped away from it. So of course we're not
Yeah.
talking those folks,
Like,
but
if if you go look at their revamped website, which I would encourage nobody to do, because this I even hesitant to talk, for too long about this at this point, because we're platforming a bad actor by giving him even the airtime. That's, I think it's important for people to know. So I talked about it a little bit earlier, but yeah, I mean, this was the worst kept secret in New England psychedelic advocacy for the last half decade. I have had over 100 people across 8 states in, the Northeast region in particular, reach out to me with stories about this individual, and folks from all across the country. Mistreatment, toxic behavior, outright lying or slandering slash, defaming, driving wedges between activists in an attempt to, gain power, priority, etc. And just in general, like, just really doing so much more damage to the movement than good. And the number one thing that was really proof of that is, as soon as that Stolen Valor story was published, the floodgates really opened up. The number of people that had stories to share, but that also were like, now that this is over, now that the story has been told, like, what's next? How can I get involved again? That they basically only left, I mean, dozens of advocates that would have showed up at state houses and showed up at City Hall, that left the movement because of this one individual.
Mhm.
Um, and even if the allegations were untrue, the driving people away from the movement is inexcusable,
Yeah,
and
even
cause for a
linking up
lack of
with
leadership.
sorry, just say even in linking up with Kevin and the prohibitionist mind, like just I heard him like push back on the grow model is the home grow is a bad thing now, and I was like,
Oh
what's
yeah,
happening out there in Massachusetts? And
yeah, dude.
then I saw the Kevin thing, and I was like, why is he hooking up with a major prohibitionist that's getting funded from all these government sources to keep cannabis illegal, and now he's pushing that same angle for psychedelics. Why would you want to ally with somebody like that? It
He
was
just wanted to kill it. He just it's always been about him.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, without getting too much farther into that, I will just say that, like, I would really encourage folks to go read some of my reporting on the kind of what we've now dubbed the Bay Staters saga. And I would encourage you to reach out to the folks who are quoted in those articles. I mean, we've got a running list of condemnations, multiple state reps, prominent former cannabis officials. There's a lot more stories in the works in that regard as to what really went down there. But it's a good segue into how the Question 4 campaign really came about, which is that in the wake of Colorado's really surprise, I mean, I was not covering this back when Colorado passed. I believe it was Prop 122. Um, I was not covering this issue. It was before my time, but I've become aware that, like, folks were really shocked that it passed. Folks that worked really hard on the ground in that campaign went to bed that night with, Prop 122 trailing and looking like it wouldn't pass, and woke up shocked that it did. So the Political Action Committee, New Approach PAC, which notably is a spinoff of the Marijuana Policy Project, um, was responsible for 109 in Oregon, the psilocybin service center model, with the separate full drug decriminalization measure that was unfortunately rolled back, I think unfairly, but that's just me. Um, New approach came into Massachusetts for a number of different reasons. One, there'd been some pretty remarkable progress at the local level. Started off by Decriminialize Nature, Massachusetts, really kind of gallivanted forward, again, not by Bay Staters, but rather by a number of dedicated activists in Western Massachusetts, including the UMass Amherst Psychedelics Club. Really want to shout out those guys who are driving force in both East Hampton, Northampton, Amherst, uh, and had really great conversations with folks in Springfield and elsewhere surrounding local municipal deprioritization measures. It's been a long weekend, Larry. I'll speed this up. Yeah. So new approach, obviously Boston is in particular here in Massachusetts, I'm in Boston, as I've said, is kind of like the mecca of Western education. Uh, Harvard, massive biotech industry, number of phenomenal research institutions surrounding it, Dana-Farber. I mean, the dimes and dollars that could go into a robust psychedelic, investment in psychedelic research just in Massachusetts would do, wonders for the state economy. I think 500,000 Massachusetts residents work in the healthcare industry. So that's that's one attraction. Obviously, Massachusetts has a storied history of psychedelic use with Harvard Psychedelics Club, Leary, Ram Dass, et cetera. The Boston Psychedelic Research Group, BPRG, has also had a strong presence here for a number of years. They, I think, are now in the process of rebranding to PRG and going national. Would encourage folks to stay tuned for more info about that, because I actually think that could be a really good thing. Could be in tandem, the Decrim Nature folks, potentially, at least my hope. But that said, came in here really hoping, and if you look at Massachusetts history, has long been kind of a tastemaker for progressive policy at the state level to kind of take the national leap. And this would have been third time's the charm, right? They would have been able to take this dual decrim service center model, so they said, and apply it and copy paste it if it could pass in Massachusetts, pretty much anywhere else that might fit the mold. It did not work out that way. I don't think that they actually had very much confidence that that bill would ever pass. And I think there's a story to be told there that I would encourage folks to stay tuned for more info about soon. But yeah, came in with $1 million from David Bronner from All One God Faith Inc. And spurred by some support from big money from Austin Hearst IV and a number of other larger donors. Not really a lot of small dollar donors, despite significant grassroots interest and like serious interest from the cannabis industry in supporting the initiative. They just didn't want to work with them. So kind of came in and ran the exceptionalist campaign, if you will. And didn't want to talk about decrim. I'm sure that you got into this a little bit with Jamie, but basically told their staffers and their volunteers to not talk about how this measure would include decriminalization or any of the home grow, and really, misled, according to constituents that I've spoken to across the state, like really misled a lot of people that are involved in local politics about what this bill actually would be. And I'm not at liberty to speculate as to the origins or reasonings or intentions. Again, I would say stay tuned, but I will emphasize that this is not a state that wasn't interested in some form of psychedelic policy reform. This was a state that didn't know enough about this bill going in to make an informed vote. And I think that that is not only a misinformation issue on the part of the prohibitionist campaign that cropped up. I do want to note that by the exit polling, like James Davis was not a reason that this didn't pass. Like he just wasn't. And if you hear from anybody that Bay Staters was some reason that question 4 failed, that's hogwash. I've seen the numbers. Like people didn't know who he was. He's small potatoes outside of this very specific bubbled community. But people didn't know that this bill was even on the ballot. Less than 50% of the Massachusetts electorate knew on election day, walking into the voting booth, based on the campaign's exit polling, that question 4 was even the psychedelics were even on the ballot this year. They had $8 million to run a robust public education campaign. And instead they just didn't. And I, for the life of me, still can't really figure out why. And I think that that's a question we should all ask ourselves. I also think it's worth noting that like a week before the election, it looked like this thing might pass. I think polling is pretty broken in modern politics. So I would say probably don't trust the polls. And I leaned in and made some predictions based on those polls that I was flat out wrong. I thought it was going to pass. but it lost by like almost 15%.
Mhm.
I mean, it was pretty stark how, uh, just how flat this thing failed, uh, and fell at the ballot box, on election day. And it really leads you to wonder, like, we have a group that's led major policy reforms in Oregon and Colorado that are a mess. The Oregon system is unaffordable. It is not generating revenue for the state. In fact, taxpayers are footing an inordinate amount of keeping that system afloat. And the most beneficial thing profit wise is for the companies that get to charge you $14,000 for facilitator training that have cropped up out there. And I'm sure that they do a great job and whatever, but you're not going to catch me paying $14 to learn how to trip sit, respectfully. Um,
Yeah, and
so
I
we
think the
have,
sorry,
sorry,
go
just
ahead.
to finish my thought very quickly. I know I ramble. We have a system in Oregon that is a mess. We have a system in Colorado that's being actively hacked away at, and stripped bare of many of the basics that folks that really fought on the front lines for that bill from a grassroots perspective really wanted to be hallmarks. The regulatory process, has been a real struggle. These are bills, that were written by the same group, and then they fall flat in Massachusetts. You really have to ask yourself, why would anybody give a group like this any money to drive change, and to be in charge? They're writing bad policy and they're not delivering results.
Right.
Period.
Yeah,
Would you continue to retain an employee who doesn't deliver results?
and they're upsetting the grassroots because I know what happened after Massachusetts happened. The rhetoric became, oh, anything with decrim can't pass. So then they threw out a whole bunch of new bills, spaghetti against the wall. Two examples that I can think of are Washington and Arizona. In Washington, they went, it was the same crew, Tom Eckert from Oregon and a bunch of other folks, Healing Advocacy Fund people, all that kind of stuff, which are all other forms of New Approach Pack down the way,
Yeah.
right? And in Washington, they made the mistake that they said something like, this supersedes all other local ordinances, right? And of course, 14% of Washingtonians have already passed deprioritization policy in all the cities there, from Seattle, Port Townsend, Jefferson County, Olympia, and now Tacoma. And they're like, no, this what? You can't do that, right? That so got the grassroots hyped, and they came out. And of course, the first thing that the bill writer said was like, oh, well, we actually amended that out. It's not that way anymore. But at that point in time, the community there was like, no, unless this is grow gather gift model, we're not for this, right? So
Yeah.
they ended up tanking that bill, which is I think good for the grassroots community out there.
Yeah.
Then we
Shout
happen
out
in
Reach Washington, by the way. Shout out the folks at Reach Washington. They're fantastic and should
Reach
be in
and
charge of whatever.
Aaron at Port Townsend Psychedelic Society. They were doing some good work out there. Decrim Nature, all the teams came together, and it was really great to see that sort of collaboration. And then in Arizona, we had another bill that came out, and we didn't, but the bill came out, and it basically said something like, it was going to be a legalization model, but because they're seeing how this model in Oregon is not financially stable, and Colorado, et cetera, the ways that they're going to fund it, because that's always what you got to look at, is the bottom line, who's funding this and how is it getting funded, right? Because Oregon now, despite the fact that Healing Advocacy Fund said that they would basically be able to be sustainable after a couple of years, they're now costing taxpayers $3.5 million a year or something like that, right? So in Arizona, it was two things that they were going to fund it by: the license fees and the criminal penalties. So now you've re-incentivized through this quote unquote legalization bill, you've re-incentivized criminalization. Because if you're not within that model that says, hey, you're gonna pay this amount in this service center, which by the way is gonna get data collected and all that other kind of stuff, which is on a
So
whole other.
many downstream issues that we aren't talking about with this. And yeah, there's some great lawyers with the Ruddock Law Group and based out of Jersey, but one of them's based in New Mexico. That's really opened my eyes to the concerns surrounding privacy and service center models, data privacy. We really need to be thinking about that.
It's a big conversation. I mean, I wouldn't want to have, some big experience and, I'm just like going through the ridiculousness of the experience and all the different sorts of things that you can think of at that time, maybe have nothing actually due to it through reality. It's just part of what you're experiencing. You got to sort of be in that and feel that. And all of a sudden that's recorded. You said this thing and blah, blah, blah. Or, I'm drooling on the floor and there's some tape recording of it, video recording. And of course, it's under the guise of we need protection. We need protection of the patient and the client. We need data collection for further information. But at the same time, like, who wants a file of all your trips? I
Yeah.
mean, it would if it wasn't if it wasn't
Yeah.
dystopic. It would be
And
fun to see my journeys,
another,
but not through the government.
yeah, I will also one more quick thing about Reach Washington. I talked a little bit earlier about, psychedelic states of America a little bit. I've launched this folks, I would encourage folks to check it out. I've launched a Psychedelic States of America Spotlight Advocacy Initiative. We're going to interview different advocates or advocacy groups in all 50 states, plus DC and Puerto Rico, hopefully before the end of the year. I think we got time to pull it off for the end of the year. But Reach Washington, we are in the process of working out the details for our upcoming live stream, so stay tuned for information, and really want to be able to use that process in that space to really tell that truth. And how, I wrote an article for Filter Magazine over a year ago now about why their ballot initiative that they were aiming to have on the ballot in 2026 was different, and why they could really be the reclamants of decrim at the state level, regardless of what happens in Massachusetts. Had conversations directly with folks in kind of the New Approach orbit about, hey, I just did this really great interview with the folks at Reach Washington. They're really special. You guys should give them a call. And then, a bill, I don't know, it's not directly New Approach per se, but a bill filed by some folks adjacent to that whole little satellite constellation, if you will, did not have any input from a group that had media coverage and a ballot initiative like already geared up. It's already on the ballot for 2026. They just got to get going with the fund. Like, they just need funding. That's what's so wild to me, is that like there's a viable option to enact statewide policy, and they just went the route that they could have control over. I had a really great interview, speaking of the advocacy initiative, to start the whole thing with some of the grassroots leaders down in New Mexico. I'm very excited about the coalition that they have in the grassroots space. They've been through some turbulence, but they have some really strong leadership. Joaquin Orozco of Decrim Psych New Mexico is fantastic. He's been around for a long time.
I Decrim Nature for some time down there too.
Yeah. And yet, I think that, it's worth noting that the newly rebranded Psychedelic Health Equity Initiative has now rebranded to the Psychedelics for Mental Health Access Alliance, the PMAA. And on their blog, there's a piece about, taking responsibility or like credit for this health equity fund model that has been cropped up in New Mexico. That's supposedly going to be a fund that helps people who can't afford these treatments afford them, but has no money appropriated to it currently, and we're entering global recession. So
Right.
you think that that is going to be a top of mind for the New Mexico State Legislature to provide additional state funding so that poor people can get access to psilocybin-assisted therapy, when the medical tourism route is going to drive revenue so much more so for that? Like that, there's no incentive in
So
today's economic landscape.
you've
So
been
again,
looking a
I
lot
think
at
it's
the
a
New Mexico.
bad policy.
Yeah, you've been just real quick on that. You've been looking a lot, obviously, at the New Mexico policy. It's a medicalized version, just for people that aren't really aware of it. The one that just passed is what I'm guessing what you're speaking about here. Medicalized version for specific treatments. I think PTSD, substance use issues,
Yeah, which is
depressions, and other conditions. Did you ever see a mechanism anywhere there for how to get the material to the doctors? Is it's I think it's fresh mushrooms, but they don't allow for cultivation as far as I saw there. Am I missing that somewhere in the bill?
I will need to go and review the language. I would really encourage folks, a person who's an ace for this to talk to is Denali Wilson, formerly of the New Mexico ACLU, really fascinating legal mind who really helped them bridge the gap. She would be my first go-to call after this to clarify. I don't think that there were cultivation guidelines included in the legal framework that was proposed. I do know that decrim was bounced around for a while, and they made the decision to go kind of medical first, but not stop fighting for decrim. And I will say that, like, having gotten to know the grassroots leaders in that space, like, they're not giving up. And I do think that, like, that is a unique state where decrim at the state level is viable much sooner rather than later, with the right team reaching out to the legislature and work. We're seeing conservative states having an increase in increased interest at the state level in decriminalization, specifically of psilocybin, like New Hampshire, that kind of has a bit of a purplish streak there a little bit in certain pockets as well, like New Mexico. So
New Mexico has the thing where they are allowed in cultivation anyway.
yeah, that's a
So
huge part of it. Is Alaska has the same thing, the state Supreme Court's precedent where right to privacy is extended to one's home.
I think New Mexico was
Well,
something where they appealed manufacturing cultivation out for manufacturing. They're saying if you're growing something, it doesn't consider it manufacturing. But
okay, that makes sense.
yeah. So you can grow mushrooms, but you can't pick them or dry them. Then that's use in possession. So they're already like
Yeah.
50% of
So,
the way there, in
I
terms of.
know that whatever the appointed regulatory board will probably nail down some of those guidelines and some of that framework. But again, like an unelected independently appointed regulatory board, I've seen in Massachusetts how, that hasn't really worked well. I mean, the legislature does not do them any favors, and the way that certain cannabis frameworks have been rolled out in different states has just been a mess. Connecticut has a lot of real issues because it's MSO dominated. I fear that Missouri, which has a similar MSO structure for their cannabis industry, I fear that like a regulated medical dispensary access for psilocybin, which I know some of their cannabis MSOs have had their eye on in a long-term vision, I think that could be really dangerous for access in a way that if a medical model like New Mexico is what comes first without decrim, I'm not a fan of that. But if the advocates in New Mexico have the momentum and coordination and know-how and talent, which I haven't gotten to know them, believe that they do, to be able to not give up on decrim and in fact really push the issue and drive that change forward sooner rather than later, then I would really want to champion that and like hope that they can. All that said, the political pragmatism issue in the psychedelic space is one that I don't think anybody really knows where the middle ground is. So many folks, like you said, coming out of Massachusetts are claiming, at least in the high funders, PSFC world, Psychedelic Science Funders Collaborative world, are really pushing the narrative that decrim in particular, no, I mean, decrim, I guess, more broadly is the reason that question 4 didn't pass when that's not true. Home cultivation was definitely a big issue. I think people didn't really understand home grow. I think the way that the bill was written, 12 by 12 foot, scared people. I think that the way that the bill ended up, summarized on the ballot was very problematic and something that like probably influenced a lot of people who had no idea it was on the ballot voting no. They saw 12 foot by 12 foot and all these psychedelics they'd never heard of. And there was no public education campaign surrounding it beforehand. So how would they know? Um, and so again, like, there are ways to advocate for and include provisions or loopholes, et cetera, for protections for home grow and for decrim on a state by state level that just requires a more nuanced policy crafting process than we have seen thus far. And you can say that it's the Wild West and that nobody's done this before. And yes, that is true. But so few in the psychedelic space policy crafting wise seem to be actively attempting to learn from the mistakes made in cannabis policy, which is so ironic because New Approach Pack is a spinoff of the Marijuana Policy Project. So you'd think that there would be an active attempt to learn from some of the mistakes made, especially because some of the prominent New Approach operatives worked for the Marijuana Project for a long time, but I have seen them make the same mistakes over and over and over. And I don't think it's like the frontline level staffers, to be clear. Like people are products of systems of power in so many ways. I think that plenty of people that work for these groups really believe they're doing the right thing and really believe they're operating in good faith. And, I disagree with a lot of them. And I know you do too, Larry. But I think that the power structures above them, incentivizing them to, carry out orders or prop themselves up as the experts, that needs to be deconstructed and discussed more. And it's my hope that what comes next for my media coverage and, for an expansion of psychedelic media coverage in the near future, hopefully in tandem with some other great organizations, will be able to really open people's eyes to how these bills become law and basically how a group of people that don't live in your state decided one day that they were going to be the experts and going to get to decide for you, and weren't going to involve you in the process.
And even those experts, the sort of deep pockets they're listening to, I've spoken to and sort of rewind a minute. You dump a lot in. I have a couple rewinds to go there, but
Yes, yeah. No, I
but,
can
uh,
go
but
on.
the one concern about sort of the medical, I think, is like once you establish that, you've created a consumer model, which then is threatened by personal access. So that's my concern when you start off with these other models or these other approaches without decrim first, is like they're never going
Yeah,
to go back to decrim because that cuts out their bottom line. So that's one concern. Secondly, I've talked to a lot of medical professionals, people that have worked at the VA, other places like that, that have been kind of lukewarm on the idea of psychedelic legalization or psychedelic medicalization. These are medical doctors
yeah,
oftentimes. And when I asked them about, when I start having the conversation about stuff, and they're still uncertain about the science, but almost every single one of them agrees that no one should be going to jail for it. So again, if we're really talking about decrim here, these medical, and even the AMA and others, well, there's maybe it was an AMA, I think it was AMA, maybe said decrim, they're a decrim proponent, but not for medicalization necessarily, because there's still, the science still has to be discovered, and obviously have challenges with the double-blind placebo and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they all can agree, and even some folks that I won't say the names of the people, but some professors I've known that have done a lot of experiences on their own, have come out with being like, oh, we have to put guardrails up. This can't be a quote unquote, as you said, the Wild West, et cetera, et cetera. But when you really dig down, they are agreeing that, yeah, people shouldn't be incarcerated for this, right? So
Yeah.
that's maybe this the languaging that needs to be used, because I think that's an easy thing to understand. Like, should someone go to jail for this thing? Should someone go to prison for this thing? You know,
Yeah. No,
or
so
in
agreed.
Nevada, it's like, over an ounce of mushrooms is considered a class A felony, which is the same as like somebody killing somebody else. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous. Right?
And I'm really glad that you pointed that out, and I'll keep this next thing very brief. But there's a case in Massachusetts right now. There's these two 18-year-old kids out in Western Massachusetts who were busted selling cannabis and nicotine products to, their, I guess, high school classmates, and had a pretty robust operation going. But again, two things that are federally legal. And this bust happened like late December of last year. And when they got busted, they also got caught with, per the bust photo that the cops take, a whole stash. There were like a couple of baggies of mushrooms, like two like Ziploc plastic baggies, sandwich bags, right? Like what question four would have decriminalized was up to like, 1 ounce of pure psilocybin, which you and I both know could be like up to 165, grams of dried mushrooms, maybe even more, depending on potency, etc. Now, so these kids are now facing 5 years in state prison, a class B felony, because they had a couple of baggies of mushrooms on top of, cannabis and nicotine that they shouldn't have been selling, whatever. But should these 18-year-old kids be facing 5 years in state prison? Uh, they're working class kids. They probably can't get the very best lawyers. It's a real tragedy that a group came in here and uh, didn't take that into consideration, what they were really fighting for and who they were really fighting for, um, and didn't give it the old college try, to put it lightly. Yeah, and to that point, briefly about the policy crafting, like another example of something that, I mean, you've been a very outspoken voice in pushing back against, saying civil penalties are enough. You
Mhm.
know, we shouldn't be penalizing, we shouldn't be confiscating somebody's stash at all. I mean, that's a form of criminalization.
Mhm.
$150 fine, $250 fine, that stuff adds up. I mean, the average 60% of Americans can't afford $1,000 emergency right now. And you want to charge that, 150 bucks, 250 bucks for having a little bit more on their person in public, or because you come to a party and you see that they've got some on their desk, or it never made sense to me. And I appreciate you voicing that. But we can write bills, we can write policy in a way that takes that into account without scaring people into thinking that we're opening the floodgates. Question four very explicitly would have only like had like only, I don't love civil penalties, but people were freaked out that the maximum penalty for someone who gave mushrooms to a minor or psychedelics to a minor was like $100. But they wrote the bill that way, like knowing that people would read it, maybe assuming people are too stupid, which is another thing that I take offense to, because I think people are not too stupid to sift through this stuff. You have to bring them the information in a digestible way, but people are interested and are looking for better information. Anyways, I know we're short on time.
Yeah,
So,
no worries. Yeah, yeah, no, I appreciate all this. It's been a really great conversation. I have only just a couple more questions. I know Rachel has a question as well.
of course,
And just one little clarity issue, because I know we spoke about this earlier, and because I'm living in Berkeley, I just want to sort of take take one moment to have a secondary sort of validation of the fact that Berkeley was not a James Davis experience there. So I know James Davis has been claiming Berkeley for a little while, so just kind of wrap that up in this whole little process here. But I really appreciate all the work you're doing. I really I look forward to hearing more about the psychedelic states of America. I look forward to connecting with some local teams that are doing some really incredible work all over the place. There's lots of teams that are popping up now. We've been doing a little bit less of a hype and more of a celebration afterwards, because there's been some detractors out there that'll go after the teams. But I'm really excited to share some of their insights
Yeah,
with you, or share who they are, so that they can sort of speak to you in terms of your national coverage there. So
absolutely.
that's really great. And yeah, please let us know maybe in a minute before when we wrap up how to sort of contact you on that. And then I'm going to try, and Rachel, I've been kind of missing on this question. I've been trying to do this. I remember we did it the first few episodes, and then I spaced on it. What does decriminalize nature mean to you? That's the question we're going to start asking everybody
I
at
was
the end.
just thinking about that too, Larry, how like we used to close the show with that like the differentiation between like what decrim means versus
Right.
legalization. So yes, go for it.
So what when you hear the words decriminalize nature, what does that mean to you?
The simple version is that nobody should be criminalized or persecuted for use of, cultivation of, or utilizing nature in any form, whether psychoactive or otherwise, for the purpose of bettering, healing, enjoying their life in a safe and responsible way, or not, because you shouldn't be criminalized because you use something in a way that you maybe weren't informed and have a negative experience. There's so many layers to that I'm sure we can get back to, but the very basic thing is that I just don't think that people should go to prison or face persecution by the law. I don't think that the federal government should care if I use a psychedelic mushroom or psychedelic substance in the confines of my own home or with friends or safely or anywhere, as long as I'm being safe and responsible and a good neighbor and paying my taxes. Libertarians might not like me saying that, but being a responsible citizen. Um, yeah.
So thank you, Jack. Appreciate it. Rachel, let's toss it to you for the question.
Oh yes. So Jack, when you were saying that you wanted to become a journalist by the time you were 13, what a thing. That's I think that is almost like a bit of a blessing in terms of like knowing exactly what you want to do in your life. I have a special affinity for news anchors because I wanted to be like April O'Neil and Lois Lane and like investigative news reporter. And I think sometimes people forget that Superman's alter ego is actually a reporter, right? So
Yeah.
keep that in mind. So I also say that news anchors are basically you're anchoring in reality through storytelling. So people, we tell fantastical tales. I do comic books, like this is just a tale, but what news is doing is like this is the story of what is real. So in all of your experience, Jack, do you have a story that most vibes with you? Like right now, you probably have multiple favorite stories that you've worked on, but do you have something that comes to mind right now that, like, in your whole experience of storytelling and bringing stories to light that you want to bring to light right now?
Um, I think the Stolen Valor piece was, I mean, I think that's the generic and easy example, but a story that I'm really proud that I was able to report that kind of fell into my lap. So I live in South Boston, really kind of in the set of Good Will Hunting, if you will, and I live right up the street from a CBD wellness and apothecary store that, I've covered some of the gray market products in this space, and I was aware of some of the shrooms, diamond shrooms recall stuff that happened, but random early Wednesday in November last year, this little sleepy CBD store up the street from me gets raided by the DEA.
Mm.
And the story that I published was that they got raided, and basically that the products, the Road Trip Desert Stardust gummies, and one other product name is escaping me, a different brand, had been confiscated on an incoming shipment. DEA officers and Boston police officers came in at gunpoint, like absolutely wild response, claiming without providing like a proof of testing that one of the products they were confiscating had tested positive for psilocybin. So that is the story that I reported. And I came to find out, and have been hoping to write a part two on this and tell the full saga, that the DEA both like apologized, gave the confiscated product back, and admitted that the product they confiscated did not test positive for psilocybin, which, like,
Mm.
who have ever had any interaction with the DEA or like cops or law enforcement in general, like they don't willingly apologize.
He said sorry.
Oh, they done messed up. Uh, so
Wow.
yeah, and like gave back. So, but it became, I mean, that ended up being like the second most clicked on story in talkingjointsmemo.com last year. Again, because
Beautiful.
people are really fascinated by these issues, but also I really be able to hope to vindicate those folks at some point, because I'm sure that that did not help their bottom line, that happened. And again, DEA apologized. They messed up.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of other stories to be told. I definitely have some stuff in the works that I'm excited to share soon. And yeah, but that's definitely one that I was both proud to report the initial telling of and hope to be able to, tell the full tale soon.
very cool. That was very cool. Also, I think I'll throw this back to Larry, but also like where people can find your writing and all of your work.
Yeah, so I'm mostly freelance over the last 18 months. Double Blind Magazine, Filter Magazine, harm reduction, policy focused stuff, Talking Joints Memo, been in Psychedelic Alpha. Have a piece coming out, Q&A with Reggie Harris, who I know is a good friend of the show and a
Board
Decriminialize
member as
board
well. Yeah.
member.
Yeah.
Reggie is one of my heroes, honestly. I got a great Q&A coming out with him in Cannabis and Tech today, really trying to bridge the gap and give leaders both in business and in policy reform and advocacy a voice in those B2B spaces. But I've also just launched, I've had Psychedelic States of America as a newsletter that I wasn't really doing much with, but have launched in, tandem and support, kind of powered by Lucid News and Psychedelics Today, the Advocacy Spotlight Initiative, which we're hoping to interview an advocate or advocacy group in all 50 states, plus DC and Puerto Rico. I've got Spain, Ireland, Denmark, Germany, a bunch of European EU countries, the UK, all lined up as well, Mexico and Canada. But
About France.
any
We have a
Decrim
can France
Nature,
too.
yeah, to any, yeah, and Decrim Nature France. I literally am gonna DM them again. We've been messaging them the past few days. I want to interview them as well. It's a great segue. Decrim Nature chapters out there that are not aware or might be looking to be featured or interviewed or like even a Q&A, please contact me. I'm trying to follow as many of you as I possibly can find on Instagram, but I've been told by Larry that that is not the most reliable database. So consider this a call to action. If you have been working with Decrim Nature in a chapter on state level, local level, want to start one or in the process of starting one, are interested and are in a state where there's not a lot of advocacy, Kentucky, North Dakota, South Dakota, like any of the states where you don't know what's going on, Alabama, Decrim Baton Rouge is kind of defunct right now, but had a really robust presence. And, I want to tell your story. I want you to be an unavoidable face of this movement on a policy level, so that this populist groundswell to be isn't rapidly corporatized by the same old tired institutions of power that have done the same for every meaningful uh, populist political issue over the last half century.
And how
Uh,
do they
like
contact you?
Twitter, Instagram. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's kind of where it's popping with the psychedelics and cannabis communities. But Jack Gorsline, Jack.Gorsline, just my name. And then Psychedelic States of America on Substack and all the other same platforms. YouTube as well.
Nice.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, I'm excited to hear how that goes. I'm gonna keep my ears open as well, and do some work in terms of connecting with some folks out there. But these are the stories that need to be told, and I appreciate you, being in the grassroots and really making it happen and really bringing those voices forward because they don't have the resources of the media chains or the deep pockets or anything like that. But they're still doing amazing work, as you said, the heroes of America today, really moving
Yeah,
things forward. So appreciate you telling
absolutely.
those stories and appreciate all the sort of connections we've had over the last year and a half. It's been really great to meet you and to hear you and hear your mind and have this great conversation over the last little bit of time. I'm sure we have some more coming up. Maybe after you break your next story, we'll have another little podcast going on and chat some more about all the different things that are happening in the psychedelic ecosystem. And are you going to be at the psychedelic science conference at all? Are you going to do that?
Yes, yes, and stay
So
tuned. The details will be announced, but I'll be interviewing on the expo stage, I believe on day one. Be interviewing the representatives and the state by state of the Northeast Psychedelic Advocacy Alliance,
great,
spearheaded by Jamie Morey, but got the New York folks and New Jersey and
Mhm.
Rhode Island, Connecticut,
great.
really trying to form an alliance that can withstand some of that national outside
Yeah,
pressure.
if you have all your material there, I know there's quite a few other DN folks that'll be attending just to check it out. So maybe I can
Yes,
connect with you
definitely.
there, get some interview stuff as well. So awesome.
Loved.
Awesome. Great. Well, Jack, appreciate your work as always. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Rachel, for all your help as well. Thank you, everyone out there listening. Our normal schedule is to go live every 2 weeks, but I will be out of town from May, early June. So our next podcast is actually going to be Sunday, June 15th at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. And that's going to be actually with Rachel and your partner, Kevin.
Yeah,
That's pretty
yeah.
exciting. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the deep inner worlds you both have explored together. So I'm excited to dive into that little journey. And we have quite a few sort of our next lineup for the rest of the year here is impressive. We have some really big names. We have Reggie, as you mentioned, is going to be coming up on the 22nd. We have Alexander Plesner, who is part of the Psychedelic Designs. We have
Mm,
Ben Montan, who's part of Professor Siegel's shop. Daniel Nova, who's part of Psychedelic Society San Francisco, and Flow, and et cetera, et cetera. Psychedelic
Awesome.
addiction work. I don't remember exactly what the name of it is. Jahan was going to be here on the 24th. He's done some really nice writing and some incredible work out there as well. And Travis Tyler Fluck, who is going to be here on the 21st of September, right in time for 9/20, which will be a fun little weekend celebration of mushrooms as well. So we got a big
yay.
lineup coming up. Thank you, Jack, for kind of kicking it off. We got some exciting things coming up in the near future here, and looking forward to more. So next Sunday, everybody, keep in mind that this post, if you're listening to this live, this will be reposted on our Spotify platforms next Sunday. Thank you, Rachel, for getting in on that. Again,
Yes.
thank you everyone for listening in. Until next time, tune in, stay rooted, and let's grow together. Have a great night, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Plant power to the people. Plant power to the people. Where you dream is where I'll meet you.